The town without news. Before you read and discuss. We can all get access to international news through newspapers and magazines such as The Economist. Through radio, television and, increasingly, the internet, we can read reports, examine data, hear interviews and watch videos of events around the world. But where can we learn about local news? How do we find out about local events and plan changes in the residential, commercial or industrial landscape? How do we learn about local births, marriages and deaths? In the past, local newspapers supplied this information, but how long will local newspapers survive? Read the graph. In the past, local newspapers generated a lot of their revenue from advertising, both national advertising and local classified advertising. Tick the true statements below. The article, The Town Without News, from The Economist print edition. As local newspapers collapse, information is finding new ways to reach people. Not all are high-tech. What happens when a place loses its newspaper? Most of the 80 or so local papers that have closed in Britain since the beginning of last year were the second or third strongest publications in their markets. But the weekly Bedworth Echo, which published its last issue on July the 10th, was the only paper dedicated to the town's news. A small former mining settlement in the Midlands, Bedworth also lacks a radio station. Although it will still be covered by newspapers focused on its bigger neighbours, it is now a town without news. It will not be the last. With a few exceptions, local newspapers are declining quickly. Trinity Mirror, which owned the Echo, shut 27 local newspapers last year and has already closed 22 this year. The main reason more local papers have not collapsed, says Paul Swillenberg of OC&C, a consultancy, is that they were cushioned by large operating margins. Many have gone from annual profits of up to 30% to negligible earnings. As they tip into loss, the trickle of closures is likely to become a torrent. Enders Analysis, a media consultancy, reckons a third to half may go in the next 5 years. An advertising slump has hit local newspapers much harder than national papers or other media. The growing reach of national brands like Rightmove and Auto Trader means that local papers have lost their grip on property and car advertising. Most painful has been the disappearance of job ads. Public sector recruitments had shifted mostly to official websites in the past few years, and recession has eroded the rest. In July 1999, an edition of The Echo carried 17 pages of job advertisements. The final issue had gone to 1/5 of 1 page. As it declined, The Echo withdrew from its office in the middle of town and trimmed its coverage of local affairs. By the end, it was hardly an effective watchdog. "We used to nearly write stories for the journalists," said Richard Chataway, a county councillor. Not surprisingly, the newspaper's circulation more than halved between 2001 and 2008. Something is nonetheless being lost with its departure. The Echo carried reports of school plays, notices of future meetings of the Korean War Veterans Association, local sports results and other humble fare. It also reinforced a sense of community. Borough politics has generally revolved around assertions that Bedworth is receiving more or less public money than neighbouring Nuneaton, according to Bill Hancock, a councillor. It is not clear where the debate will carry on. The internet is undermining local newspapers much more effectively than its supporting alternatives. "This is a poor town and not computer literate," says Anne Tippett of the Civic Hall, an arts centre. Bedworth has no prominent blog. Indeed, local politicians appear to be just coming around to email as a means of mass communication. Even if online sources of local news existed, they would not reach many of those who relied on the local paper. The Echo was disproportionately read by skilled manual workers and by the middle-aged and old. In its final throes, it reached just 15% of the town's 15 to 24-year-olds, but 31% of people aged 45 to 54, reckons GICREG, a local newspaper research group. Not, in short, the sort of people with Twitter accounts. Claire Enders of Enders Analysis notes that the people who most need information about local goings-on are the immobile, old and the poor, for whom the news that a local clinic is about to close can be vital. They are the people least likely to have access to broadband. As newspapers close, people will seek local news on television and radio, much of it supplied by the BBC. It will not be nearly as detailed. Yet alternatives are emerging. As its newspaper declined, Bedworth's politicians worked to set up local residents' groups as a conduit for views and information. Their meetings are advertised by means of leaflets posted through people's doors. The Civic Hall too sends leaflets to 12,500 households and hands out more at the annual carnival and on bonfire night. Now that the local paper is no more, Miss Tippett plans to do more of that. The local borough council delivers an increasingly professional-looking newsletter. So do local churches. Oddly, a problem that is high-tech in origin has strengthened a low-tech form of communication. One person who hands out a lot of leaflets these days is Lynn Price, a local activist known affectionately as Gobby Lynn. Yet she gets much of her information about planning proposals, crime and so on from the internet. This illustrates one effect of the digitisation of information. As newspapers weaken and die, most people probably become less informed about local affairs, but a few motivated folk grow extremely knowledgeable. Miss Price will miss the Bedworth Echo, but not as a source of news. It was, she says, a useful way of getting the word out. To an extent, the problem of local news is generational, a result of the difficulty of adapting to new technology. As more newspapers fail and the broadband generation ages and settles down, it is likely that online local news outfits will strengthen. Intriguing experiments are already underway. In northeast England, Trinity Mirror has Gazette Live, a mix of professional news and user-generated content sorted by postcode. Associated Northcliffe Digital, an arm of the media group that runs the Daily Mail newspaper, is rolling out a string of town-orientated websites. Associated cleverly located the local gadflies and community chatterboxes, the Gobby folk, and got them to contribute. At the moment, hyper-local sites tend to be filled with discussions of town fates and the next music night at the village pub. It may be, says Roland Bryan of Associated, that this is the equivalent of small talk at a cocktail party and that people will eventually get down to local politics. Or they may not. As local newspapers fail, we may learn that their real value was less as a check on politicians than simply as a forum for casual conversation, a place where a town can talk to itself. Exercises. Read the first 2 paragraphs of the article. Choose the correct option to complete the sentences. Read the next 2 paragraphs. Complete the sentences. The reduction in advertising revenue has the loss of advertising as a result of falling revenues, the Bedworth Echo. Read the next 3 paragraphs. Complete the sentences. The closure of the Bedworth Echo. Anne Tippett of the Civic Hall, an arts centre, believes. Claire Elders says. Read the next 2 paragraphs. How has the closure of the Bedworth Echo stimulated new ways to circulate information? Tick the statements which are true. Read the last 2 paragraphs of the article. Answer the questions. What is the problem of local news? What are the 2 intriguing experiments mentioned in the article? What conclusions does the article reach? Vocabulary. Look carefully at the words in italics. Complete the sentences. If you live in a former mining settlement, you live in a place. If your earnings are negligible. If a trickle becomes a torrent. If recession erodes something, it. If you undermine a business, you. Information about local goings-on is. A conduit for views and information is. If you want to get the word out, you want to. If you are a chatterbox, you are a person who. A check on local politicians is. Discussion. The Economist article is about one local newspaper in a small town in the Midlands of England. Think about the implications in your own community. Will the developments be the same? Will they be different? Will the solutions be the same? Will they be different? Do you agree with the conclusion of the article that local newspapers are both important as a source of information and as a forum for discussion?